Um, this is our presentation on transformative ethnic studies in schools, curriculum, pedagogy, and research by Christine E. Sleeter and Miguel Zavala.
So these are some of the words that came up constantly within our book. It's good to keep these in mind while we go through our presentation, and they'll be relevant throughout.
This is our interactive portion. Feel free to raise your hand based off or give a thumbs up or a thumb down based on your own experiences in school. My education actively challenged racism as a whole and also the telling of history from a unilateral perspective. Very nice.
I felt connected with course text and sometimes even identified with the issues discussed in my classes.
The knowledge I gained from my education has empowered me in my future goals.
I feel limited due to categorizations defined during my education.
My education actively engaged with my community and participated in social movements.
My teachers actively sought to understand and incorporate my background in my learning.
So the purpose of this interactive portion was to kind of frame things that we do and do not want to see in the educational space. And as you can see, based on our responses, it looked very differently for even just the three of us. So these are just kind of like points of reflection that we want everyone to have moving forward with our presentation.
Now that we've kind of gone through experiences with ethnic studies, these are some of our own personal experiences of our interactions with ethnic studies throughout high school. For me, I took AP US and AP European history classes, but didn't really feel reflected within those courses. The times that I did feel seen throughout the classes were within my own Spanish classes.
And then in my, go ahead. I forgot.
I took world history and AP US history, and I wouldn't really say I felt like a connection to anything in any of those classes, but my high school was 60% Asian, and I really feel like it didn't represent like the majority of like the ethnicity and like experiences of the students at the school. So I don't know.
Sorry. And then in my schooling experiences, I took both world history and AP US history, but we spent a lot of time on like European and like US history. But in comparison, there was a lot less on like African history and like Asian history and like Latin American history. So it's like there was a different degree of like complexity in our learning with each of the different regions. I definitely spent most of my time like navigating my identity outside of the classroom. But I will say after reading our reading, I did start to realize that my school did try more than other institutions to try to incorporate multicultural learning.
So some of the main takeaways within the first chapter was that Sleeter and Zavala defined ethnic studies and its key themes with ethnic studies, such as curriculum as counter-narrative, criticality, reclaiming cultural identities, intersectionality and multiplicity, community engagement, pedagogy that is culturally responsive and mediated, and students as intellectuals. Within the second chapter, they talk about mainstream curriculum as multicultural white studies. They touch on the classes were a reflection of white perspectives. And if there is inclusion of colored histories, it maintains a white point of view, which means it does not challenge or transform the white narrative.
Chapters 3 and 4 covered basically ethnic studies rooted in research, and then ethnic studies curriculum as a counter narrative. So curriculum rooted in ethnic studies at all levels from elementary school all the way to high school, all the way to higher education, have resulted in a lot of case study researches over time, showing a lot higher academic achievement and student engagement. I thought it was really interesting that one study with findings that spanned about like 3 years showed that, consistently there was better performance, and specifically performance half a standard deviation higher in student reading achievement, showing that the pedagogies rooted in ethnic studies demonstrated really, really strong ties between culturally responsive teaching, cultural mediation, and student achievement. So this chapter 3 sort of like centralized ethnic studies as something productive in a research sense and based off of real world results. Chapter 4 focused on ethnic studies being something about knowing history means knowing it through a multicultural perspective, including the perspective of marginalized peoples, not just through the Eurocentric lens, which is what we see most commonly. However, there is also caution in teaching ethnic studies without proper preparation or research, as curriculum can also serve as a tool for ongoing colonialism. And this is really interesting because it shows ethnic studies as being a catalyst for a better society, but also something that needs to be taken with caution.
So the main takeaway from chapter 5 is kind of, it looked at the experience of 9 different like teachers and their experience with ethnic studies. It spanned many grades and different states and all these things, and they kind of boiled down to these 4 main points. It's important to have self-care and trust between teachers and students, a critical analysis of racism and power, other power relations, and then like using or having students be thought of as like intellectuals, and then also being responsive and making sure that the curriculum is relevant to students in their communities. There's a lot of reasons why there's resistance against ethnic studies being taught in schools. And one of the main ones is that it challenges our current education standards. And like what Melody talked about, it goes against the Eurocentric lens that we've been taught for years. And a lot of white people don't like the thought of that, and they think what's happening now is okay. But it's also important to fight against these things and recognize that there's like issues within our education system and the standard of education that we have now. Chapter 6 looks more at research and what exactly is required and goes into the research that's being done. There's 3 main goals for the research being done. It has to be an attention organized tool, and research as a participatory and educational, while also being a tool for developmental program development. Research is really important to the movement towards ethnic studies being included in the curriculum, because people like policymakers can't just go based off how people feel and think, but like research supports this and shows that there's like pros to ethnic studies being included in our curriculum and not just something that people want. And these are some key quotes within the book. They kind of focus in on all the critical ideas and made us think, so we thought to include them.
And then we wanted to include these two questions that were posed in the book because we wanted to sort of move away from like having such a lecture style and having more just like a continuous flow of like us reflecting, and because we like reflected a lot on our experience reading the book, so we wanted that for you guys as well. So the two specific questions are, how do we translate research from one community and learning context to another? And how can educators make sense of studies based on schools and districts that are not of their own or that are not their own? Because essentially it's easy to be like, oh, ethnic studies is really needed. But then when it comes down to like relating communities, there's a lot of thought and like research that is to be done. So yeah, these questions are just for you to reflect on.
So within ethnic studies, the students are recipients of the curriculums, and within these different curriculums, they can either, within the ethnic studies, they can take part in units without actually interacting with that social group, not identify with the curriculum, be within units that maintain a white point of view, and or learn of histories without social context. The narratives don't examine institutional flaws. And within ethnic studies, a student can learn about history through a humanizing perspective, unpack and challenge narratives, reclaim identities, and gain tools to challenge social and political issues. And they can also take part in units that fill in the blanks that classes without ethnic studies do not do. Having gone through the students' roles within ethnic studies and not having ethnic studies, the education of a student can be reflective of their identities and help form communities, such as within the books and connecting back to the key quotes. The Latinx students all said that they identify with the text and that the text filled in the blanks of their understandings of their families' biographies. They reported developing a sense of community based on recognition of similar experiences and hardships. So we can see that ethnic studies is helpful and is fundamental for community building and self-identity for students.
So with all of our key takeaways and the statements from our interactive portion, we hope that we all can grow to just kind of realize and acknowledge this space that really does need multicultural learning and ethnic studies in education. And it's something that affects all of us.
In reading the book, we have really been able to see that ethnic studies has the ability to empower both students and educators, and even communities in general. It is impactful and an effort that involves everyone for it to take place. We hope we all can continue to reflect, and thank you for listening to our presentation.